Hello, my name is Lisa DeFranza, and I'm the cultural curator here at Art Ovation Hotel. Welcome to the Reimagining OKeeffe and Stieglitz 2018 exhibition. So we're starting with Georgia O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz. As you may know, these are two artists who met each other about 100 years ago. At that point, each one was at the forefront of their careers in the sense that they were transforming their art forms. They were at the cutting edge of modernism. Georgia O'Keeffe was moving into abstract paintings. Many of you probably know her large flowers and her iconic American landscapes. She was changing the way painters look at painting. And Alfred Stieglitz was a photographer who was also changing the way photographers looked at photography. He was really pushing people to understand that photography could be an art form and not merely something utilitarian or documentary. So they met each other and sparks flew. They were artistic compatriots, and they also fell in love with each other, had a relationship, got married 6 years later, and spent the rest of their lives together until he died in 1946. This piece was created by artists in Sarasota. Why? Well, fast forward to about 5 years ago, Sam Alfred, who owns Alfred and Contemporary Gallery on 5th Street, posed a question to a collective of artists. He hired them full-time, and he said to them, okay, imagine what Georgia O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz could create if they were alive today with contemporary technology. And they spent a couple years doing just that. And a lot of the work we're going to see in this exhibition, all of the work, in fact, came out of that exploration. Alfred and Contemporary Gallery is a print shop as well as a gallery. They have a very high-end print shop, in fact. So this piece, O'Keeffe and Stieglitz, 1908, came out of that print shop. You can see it's two sections put together, large form print. Inside each of the letters are images from original Stieglitz photographs. The piece says artistic revolutionaries because that's the term that the artists at Alfred labeled for Georgia O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz. That's the term that they called them. They had big shoes to fill when they started this exploration. So this is really a signature piece. So here in our artist studio in the Art Ovation Hotel, we have 3 prints that were created by the artist in that collective at Alfred and Contemporary Gallery. These 2 prints, to my left and to my right, are significant aspects of the research the artist did about our 2 artistic revolutionaries, Georgia O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz. This here is a print of Stieglitz as a young man, probably looking a lot like what he looked like when he met Georgia O'Keeffe. And here we have a tribute to Stieglitz's gallery. This poster, Madness Like 291, is referencing 291 Fifth Avenue, where Stieglitz had his photo gallery. And it was in that gallery that he featured other art photographers. And also, interestingly, he brought the work of modernist painters like Picasso and Matisse to show in his gallery. And that was the first time they showed in this country. So he was, again, pushing at the forefront of modern art. So as you can see on this wall, there are 2 series of paintings. One is the Flower Series, and one is the Stripe Series. But we'll talk about the Flower Series first. Of course, this was inspired by Georgia O'Keeffe's flowers. And it was created by Betsy Cameron, who's an artist who now lives in New York, but was part of the Sarasota collective at Alfred and Contemporary Gallery when she created this work. It is not created with a paintbrush and not created with a camera. So actually the process of creation of this work is still a mystery even to us. It's a proprietary process. Interestingly, you can see that the Alfred and logo is a signature piece on her work, and she signs the work as well. This is one print of 3 that exists in the world. She really wanted to have the flower be the absorbing factor in someone's experience of this work. Again, inspired by Georgia O'Keeffe, who, when she was in New Mexico, really wanted people to be able to see her giant flower paintings clear back in New York City. That's what she said. So Betsy Cameron kind of channeled Georgia O'Keeffe to create this work. So the second series we have on this big wall is the Stripe series. Here's one example of the Stripe series. This is Petunia. And what the artists at Alfred did when they created this work is they wanted to dissect and, if you will, get a coarse sample of Georgia O'Keeffe's work. So they took an original Georgia O'Keeffe painting, or a print of an original Georgia O'Keeffe painting, and they chose a 3-pixel wide strip of that painting. They then transferred that to the edge of a piece of canvas, and they literally pulled it through an inkjet printer. So these stripes were created by stretching a canvas through the inkjet printer. They then wanted to display the Stripe series with the original work by Georgia O'Keeffe, but they found out that if they blew up an original Georgia O'Keeffe, they'd be violating copyright. But if they got a picture postcard of that painting, they wouldn't be violating copyright. So they got a series of picture postcards, and they had a framer, a local framer, create these frames so they could display the Stripe series with the original Georgia O'Keeffe paintings. In this frame series, Alfred artists were investigating Alfred Stieglitz as a questioner of composition and what makes a composition a good composition. He was really working against conventional rules, 2/3, 1/3, however we usually conventionally look at composition. So here the artist took old photographs of Stieglitz's. This one is called New York Window Watchers. And what they did was they flipped the photograph and duplicated it. And then you can see that they silk screened on this grid, inviting all viewers to look at this image and look at each frame and say, well, how does that composition work? Yes, it's not symmetrical like the photograph, but maybe it's an interesting composition all on its own. Maybe this is an interesting composition all on its own. So it's asking us to participate in the process of upturning conventional rules of composition. And with this frame series, it's inviting all the viewers in to question how we chop up images, even taking images on our cell phone every day. How do we constantly rework composition? It's inviting viewers to rethink what they take for granted in what makes a good composition. Okay, in this series, the Jazz series, we have several paintings that are an explosion of Georgia O'Keeffe's color palettes. And what I mean by that is the artists at Alfred Contemporary Gallery selected colors from several different O'Keeffe paintings. And what they did was the same kind of process we saw around the corner, where they put the colors on canvas and pulled them through the inkjet printer. This time, however, they pulled them through horizontally and vertically. So we have kind of a cross-hatch effect. But something interesting happened when the artists created these pieces. We can see it really clearly in this piece, O'Keeffe Abstract Bar number 3. As the artist started pulling the work through the inkjet printer, the printer did what printers tend to do, which was break. They pulled the canvas through, and the printer started to jam, and the artist started to call it chattering. So as the printer started to jam, because it wasn't used to having canvas pulled through it, these crazy effects started happening. So you can see these sort of, they almost look like houndstooth patterns started to be created. And the artist got super excited because whereas normally when a printer breaks, you get frustrated, this time it started to create the most wonderful effects. So all of these paintings on this wall here were created with a printer that was breaking. And in fact, when the printer was gone and broken, no more of these could be created. So this is a really interesting, unique, happy accident series. This work, Triptych RGB Georgia, is by a Mexican artist, Roberto Trevino. He happened to be in Sarasota when Alfred and artists were at work on this project, and he was working on sand sculpture. And Sam Alfred invited him into the project, and he said, you know, I've always wanted to work with airbrush. So these paintings are airbrush paintings done entirely with airbrush, and he did a series of portraits of Stieglitz and OKeeffe. It's important to remember that the artists exploring OKeeffe and Stieglitz were trying to think about how Stieglitz and OKeeffe would work if they were living now in 2018. So when Trevino suggested using airbrush, it was another technique that the artists hadn't used to explore Stieglitz and OKeeffe. So this is a really unusual piece in this exhibition. These RGB, red, green, blue portraits of Georgia again capture her rather regal, non-conforming gender role in a really different way. So these prints by Kevin Hearne are relating to Alfred Stieglitz's series called The Equivalents. And that is when he turned his camera to the sky and took a lot of photographs of clouds, again, questioning the nature of composition. Here he took quotes from famous photographers who came after Stieglitz and who stood on Stieglitz's shoulder. So in this quotation by William Eggleston, I am at war with the obvious, he puts color together with black and white because William Eggleston became known as the photographer who really spearheaded color photography becoming art photography. He revered Stieglitz, again, and stood on his shoulders. The next series we're going to investigate is the Warhol Series. This is really interesting because the artists at Alfred were looking at Georgia OKeeffe through the lens of the cult of celebrity. So they investigated Stieglitz's shots of OKeeffe, and they chose this photograph looking very regal and also looking sort of gender non-specific. So they doubled her portrait and they mimicked Elvis with a Gun, the famous Warhol painting that really also made Elvis look pretty gender non-specific. So they were investigating OKeeffe as a celebrity on a large canvas. They painted the canvas with this silver, then they printed her image on it, and then they went back in with paint, extending the canvas down to give her a rather regal look. The artists at Alfred were investigating Warhol in conjunction with their own work in all kinds of ways. You may have noticed that the Alfred logo is on the signature line of all of the work we've been looking at. And that's because Alfred Gallery's tagline is reimagining, making, and marketing art. So they were, in fact, branding this collection of art with their signature logo, rather than holding up one singular artist, much in the same way that Warhol did with his art factory, creating art with a collective rather than an individual. Here we have the Warhol series continued, in which the artists at Alfred explored Georgia OKeeffe through a Warhol-like sense of the cult of celebrity. They looked at pictures that Stieglitz had taken of OKeeffe as a young woman and then created beautiful, high-quality prints, pastel-colored prints of OKeeffe, looking more like Audrey Hepburn than the conventional look we usually have when we see Georgia OKeeffe. They furthered that study by turning it into this canvas called Sun Prairie Girl, in which they painted a canvas, then printed on top of that canvas, and then went in with a lot more paint, creating a piece of work that's much like Warhol's treatment of Marilyn Monroe, with several Marilyns holding her up as a colorful, iconic blast of celebrity. Thank you for joining us on this tour of the Reimagining OKeeffe and Stieglitz 2018 exhibition. It really has been a wonderful partnership with Alfred Contemporary Gallery, and we hope you come back to see more exhibitions at Art Ovation Hotel.